Lieutenant Ta Jin sat alone in his quarters aboard the military starship Genesis, staring at the small metal badge in his palm. 7 years of service to the Terran Alliance, and all he had to show for it was this insignia marking him as an executor, one of the elite soldiers tasked with carrying out the Alliance's most sensitive elimination orders. The room's communication panel chimed. "Lieutenant Ta Jin, report to command immediately." He secured his badge to his uniform and made his way through the ship's narrow corridors. Other crew members stepped aside as he passed, their eyes averted. Nobody wanted to get too friendly with an executor. Admiral Song looked up from his desk as Ta Jin entered the command center. The old man's face was weathered from decades of service, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Lieutenant, we have a priority assignment." The Admiral activated a holographic display showing a prison transport ship. 3 days ago, our forces captured a Vex female during a raid on one of their outposts. Intelligence believes she's not an ordinary prisoner. Tai Jin studied the rotating image. The Vex had been humanity's enemy for nearly 15 years, an alien species encountered during mankind's expansion into the Orion Arm. Their conflict had cost millions of lives on both sides. "What makes this one special, sir?" Ta Jin asked. The Admiral's expression darkened. "She's believed to be part of their psychic division. Our teams recorded unusual brain activity during her capture. 3 guards assigned to her transport have already killed themselves without explanation." Tai Jin had heard rumors about Vex with mental abilities, but official reports had always dismissed such talk as superstition among the troops. "Your orders are to board the prison transport when it docks, confirm the prisoner's identity, and carry out immediate termination." The Admiral handed Ta Jin a small data chip. "All details are here. The ship arrives in 6 hours." "Yes, sir." As Ta Jin turned to leave, the Admiral added, "One more thing, Lieutenant. Under no circumstances are you to engage in conversation with the prisoner. And do not, I repeat, do not, make direct eye contact. That's how they establish control." Tai Jin nodded, though something about the warning struck him as odd. In 7 years as an executor, he'd never been told to avoid looking at his targets. Back in his quarters, Tai Jin reviewed the mission details. The prisoner's name was recorded as Subin, though whether this was her actual name or simply what Alliance intelligence had designated her was unclear. She had been captured during an operation codenamed Falling Star, which targeted a suspected Vex research facility. Tai Jin prepared his equipment methodically, his standard-issue pulse pistol, a neural disruptor in case the rumors about psychic abilities were true, and a recording device to document the execution as per Alliance protocols. The hours passed quickly. Tai Jin tried to eat, but found he had little appetite. Something about this mission felt different from his previous assignments. His targets were typically military leaders, spies, or terrorists, people whose crimes were clearly documented. This Vex female was classified simply as extreme danger, with little supporting evidence beyond the mysterious deaths of her guards. When the docking announcement came, Tai Jin was already waiting at the airlock. The prison transport was a small, heavily armored vessel designed for transporting high-risk detainees. Its captain, a gruff woman named My Son, greeted him with a tired salute. "Lieutenant, we've been expecting you." Her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. "The prisoner is in containment cell 3. We've kept her under double sedation since the incidents." "I'll need a full report on those deaths," Ta Jin said. Captain My Son handed him a tablet. "See for yourself. Security footage shows nothing unusual." The guards simply entered her cell for routine checks, then returned to their posts and used their own weapons on themselves hours later. No communication with the prisoner was recorded. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet as they walked toward the detention area. The usual bustle of a military vessel was absent, no idle chatter among crew members, no mechanical maintenance work in progress. "Where is everyone?" Ta Jin asked. "I've restricted all non-essential personnel to their quarters," My Son explained. "After losing 3 crew members, I'm taking no chances. They reached a heavy security door marked with warning symbols in multiple languages. The containment cell has triple-layered psionic dampeners, my son said, entering a complex security code. Though they don't seem to completely block whatever she does. The door slid open to reveal a secondary security checkpoint with 2 armed guards who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Beyond them was a short corridor ending at a transparent wall, some kind of advanced polymer stronger than steel. And behind that wall sat the prisoner. Ta Jin had seen Vex before, mostly in combat situations or autopsy recordings. This female looked different from those memories. Her skin had a pale blue tint, but her features were more human-like than he expected. She sat perfectly still on a simple bench, hands folded in her lap, wearing standard prisoner overalls. Has she spoken? Ta Jin asked, careful to keep his eyes on the data tablet rather than looking directly at the prisoner. Not a word since capture, my son replied, though the medical team recorded brain activity suggesting she understands our language perfectly. Ta Jin reviewed the execution protocols on his tablet. Standard procedure required confirmation of identity before termination. I need to enter the cell, he said finally. Captain, my son's face paled. Lieutenant, I strongly advise against. It's procedure. I'll be quick. Ta Jin checked his neural disruptor. Prepare to flood the cell with sedative gas at my command. The security process to enter the cell was elaborate. 3 separate airlocks, body scans, weapon checks. Finally, Ta Jin stood before the inner door, pulse pistol ready. Opening inner door in 3, 2, 1, the security system announced. The door slid open. Ta Jin entered, keeping his eyes fixed on the prisoner's hands, careful not to look at her face. Prisoner Subin, I am Lieutenant Ta Jin of the Terran Alliance, he stated formally. I am here to confirm your identity before carrying out your sentence. There was a moment of silence, and then a soft voice replied in perfect, unaccented human language. That is not my name. Despite his training and direct orders, Ta Jin's eyes flickered upward. For just an instant, their eyes met. Hers were deep violet with swirling patterns like cosmic nebulae. And in that moment, everything changed. Ta Jin felt a strange sensation wash over him when their eyes met. Not the mind-controlling assault he had been warned about, but something subtler. A faint connection, like recognizing someone from a forgotten dream. He quickly looked away, raising his pulse pistol. State your real name, then, he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. The Vex prisoner remained seated, her posture calm despite the weapon pointed at her. My name is Ng. I am a cultural interpreter for the Vex diplomatic corps. Ta Jin couldn't help but notice how flawlessly she spoke his language, her pronunciation perfect down to the regional accent of the central colonies. There is no Vex diplomatic corps, he replied. Your species has been hostile since first contact. A small, sad smile crossed Yunji's face. Is that what they've told you? Interesting. Despite himself, Ta Jin glanced at her again. Up close, her alien features were both strange and familiar. Her skin had a subtle luminescence that shifted with her breathing. The violet eyes that had startled him were framed by facial structures that followed the same basic pattern as a human's, yet with elegant differences. Higher cheekbones, slightly elongated features. Captain, Ta Jin called over his comm. Has this prisoner undergone genetic modification to appear more human-like? My son's voice crackled through his earpiece. Negative. That's their natural appearance. The similarities are part of why some scientists believe we may share a common ancestor species from millions of years ago. Yunji tilted her head slightly. Your scientists are partially correct. Our biologies diverged approximately 3 million years ago, though not on our respective home planets. The cedar species visited both worlds. Ta Jin frowned. Her words matched classified theories he had glimpsed in military files, information that wasn't public knowledge. How would you know what our scientists believe? He demanded. Because before this war, we shared knowledge freely, she replied. I was part of the third contact team, before your military took control of all interactions. Something about her calmness unnerved him. She showed no fear despite clearly understanding her situation. Either she was exceptionally brave, or she knew something he didn't. Lieutenant, why haven't you completed the identity confirmation? My son's voice interrupted his thoughts. Admiral Song is requesting an update. Proceeding now, Ta Jin answered. He activated his data tablet and held it up, allowing its scanners to analyze the prisoner's biometric signatures. The tablet beeped, displaying a match to the prisoner file, but with a discrepancy. The prisoner before him was designated as a Class 3 cultural interpreter in the original capture files, not a psychic weapon as Admiral Song had claimed. Ta Jin's training had taught him to notice inconsistencies. Something wasn't adding up. Why were you at a military research facility when you were captured? He asked, lowering the tablet. I wasn't. Yunji replied simply. I was at a cultural archive outpost. We maintain records of all species we've encountered. Your military attacked without warning. Ta Jin's comm crackled again. Lieutenant, the Admiral is growing impatient. Complete your mission and report back. Instead of acknowledging, Ta Jin switched off his comm. He would face consequences later, but right now, he needed answers. 3 guards assigned to your transport committed suicide. Explain that. Yunji's expression grew troubled. I felt their distress. They were struggling with something, guilt perhaps. I tried to project calming emotions, but human minds are different from ours. Sometimes our attempts to help can overwhelm your neural pathways. So you admit to influencing their minds, Ta Jin said, tightening his grip on his weapon. Not controlling, connecting, she corrected. My species is empathic. We sense emotions and can share our own. It's how we communicate on a deeper level than words allow. To demonstrate, she slowly raised her hand, palm outward. May I show you? Every warning he'd received screamed in Ta Jin's mind. This was exactly what he had been cautioned against. Yet his curiosity, and something else he couldn't name, made him hesitate rather than shoot. What are you going to do? He asked. Share a memory. One that will explain more than words could. Her violet eyes met his again. You will remain in complete control. If you wish me to stop, simply step back. Against all training and better judgment, Ta Jin gave a slight nod. Yunji closed her eyes in concentration. Suddenly, Ta Jin felt a gentle pressure in his mind, like the sensation of remembering something long forgotten. Then images began to form, not imposed on his vision, but within his thoughts. He saw a gathering of beings, humans and Vex, seated around a large table. Documents were being signed. Handshakes exchanged. The date stamp in the memory read 15 years ago, exactly when the war had supposedly begun. The first accord, Yunji's voice explained within the memory. An agreement of peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange. The scene shifted to an explosion. Humans and Vex running in panic. Emergency lights flashing. 3 days later, your military claimed we had planted explosives at the meeting site. 17 people died. 10 humans, 7 Vex, including our prime speaker. Another shift to a Vex settlement under attack from human ships. Buildings collapsing. Civilians fleeing. The retaliation your leaders told your people about was actually an unprovoked attack on our civilian outpost. The memory faded, leaving Ta Jin disoriented but unharmed. He realized he had lowered his weapon without meaning to. Why would our leaders lie about first contact? He asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Resources, Yunji replied simply. Your corporations discovered our worlds are rich in elements rare in your system. War justified taking what peaceful negotiations would have shared. A loud bang on the cell door interrupted them. Captain My Son's voice came through, no longer over the comm but directly through the door. Lieutenant Ta Jin. Admiral Song has overridden my command codes. A security team is on the way to complete your mission. They have orders to eliminate you too if you've been compromised. Ta Jin looked at Yunji, really looked at her this time. In her eyes, he saw not an enemy, but a being with intelligence and emotions as complex as his own. He thought of the memory she had shared, the peaceful first contact that had been erased from human history. He made his decision. "How good are you at escaping?" he asked, holstering his weapon and extending his hand toward her. Yunji's luminescent skin brightened slightly as she stood. "Better with help," she replied, taking his offered hand. Behind them, the security locks on the cell door began to disengage. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for Ta Jin to crawl through, with Yunji following close behind. The narrow tunnel ran between the prison ship's outer hull and its interior walls, a space designed for repair drones, not humans or Vex. "How much farther?" Yunji whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "2 more junctions," Ta Jin replied, checking the small holomap projected from his wrist device. "Then we'll reach the emergency shuttle bay." They had escaped the detention area just as the security team breached the cell door. Captain My Son had bought them precious minutes by accidentally activating the wrong security protocol, sealing the entire detention section in a containment lockdown. Ta Jin paused at a junction point, listening for signs of pursuit. The ship's alarm systems blared distantly, muffled by the thick walls. "Why are you helping me?" Yunji asked quietly. "You're risking everything." Ta Jin considered the question as he checked the next passage for movement sensors. In truth, he wasn't entirely sure himself. The memory she had shared had been convincing, but was it real or fabricated? All his training warned against trusting an enemy combatant. "Let's just say I have questions that need answers," he finally replied. "And I won't get them if you're dead." They continued in silence until reaching a small access panel. Ta Jin pressed his ear against it, then carefully unlocked the mechanism. The panel swung open to reveal an empty corridor. "The shuttle bay is through that door," he said, pointing across the hallway. "But we'll need access codes." Yunji studied the security panel beside the door. "I may be able to help with that." "You can hack Alliance security systems?" Ta Jin asked skeptically. "Not hack," she corrected. "But some of your technology has neural interfaces similar to ours." She placed her palm flat against the panel's surface and closed her eyes in concentration. To Ta Jin's surprise, the panel's lights flickered, then turned green. The door slid open silently. "How did you?" "Later," she interrupted, pulling him through the doorway. "They're coming." The shuttle bay contained 3 small vessels designed for short-range emergency evacuation. Ta Jin quickly moved to the nearest one and began the startup sequence. "These shuttles are programmed to return to the nearest Alliance outpost," he explained. "We'll need to override the navigation system." As Ta Jin worked on the controls, Yunji suddenly tensed. "Someone's coming. Multiple people." Ta Jin didn't question how she knew. He had already seen enough of her abilities to trust her senses. "Get inside. I'm almost done." The shuttle systems hummed to life as they boarded. Through the viewport, Ta Jin saw the bay door opening, armed soldiers appearing in the entrance. He slammed the hatch closed just as blaster fire erupted, energy bolts bouncing off the shuttle's reinforced hull. "Hold on," he warned, activating the emergency launch sequence. The shuttle shot from the bay, the sudden acceleration pressing them into their seats. Behind them, the prison transport grew smaller as they gained distance. "They'll send fighters after us," Ta Jin said, programming a course away from known Alliance patrol routes. This shuttle wasn't designed for long voyages, but it should get us to the outer rim territories. Yunji watched him work, her expression thoughtful. "You still don't fully trust me." It wasn't a question, but Ta Jin answered anyway. "Trust is earned. The memory you showed me. How do I know it was real?" "You don't," she admitted, "but I can show you how to find proof." She reached across to the navigation console and entered a series of coordinates. "There's an abandoned research station at these coordinates. It was a joint human-Vex facility before the war. The Alliance didn't destroy it because they wanted to study our technology. The original records of first contact should still be in its database. Jin studied the coordinates. The location was in a remote sector, far from established routes, the perfect place to hide important information. Or the perfect trap. That's 3 days' journey in this shuttle, he noted. We barely have supplies for one. There's a trading outpost here. Yunji pointed to a point midway in their journey, not officially Alliance-controlled. We can resupply there. Jin made his decision. Setting course now. As the shuttle's autopilot engaged, Jin finally had time to process the events of the past few hours. He had betrayed his oath, helped an enemy escape, and was now a fugitive. Everything he had built his life around, his career, his loyalty to the Alliance, was gone. You're experiencing doubt, Yunji observed quietly. That's natural. Jin turned to face her. Can you read all my thoughts? She shook her head. Only strong emotions and surface thoughts. Your mind is louder than most humans. Clearer. Is that why you chose to connect with me instead of the guards? A small smile crossed her features. I didn't choose you, Lieutenant. Your admiral did, though I doubt he realized what he was doing. What do you mean? People like you are rare. Those who question orders, who look beyond what they're told to see what is. That's why you became an executor, isn't it? To see the truth for yourself. Jin was unsettled by her insight. It was true. He had volunteered for the executor program, not out of bloodlust or blind loyalty, but because it gave him access to information most soldiers never saw. Each mission had revealed more about how the Alliance really operated. If what you've shown me is true, he said slowly, then the entire war is based on a lie. Not the entire war, Yunji clarified. The beginning. But once blood is shed, reasons multiply. Many on both sides now fight for vengeance, not resources. The shuttle's communication system suddenly activated, broadcasting on all emergency channels. Admiral Song's face appeared on the screen, his expression cold with fury. Lieutenant Jin, you are hereby charged with high treason, desertion, and aiding an enemy combatant. All Alliance forces are authorized to terminate you on sight. Your family has been taken into protective custody. The message repeated, then the screen went dark. Jin's hands clenched into fists. Protective custody was a thinly veiled threat. His parents and younger sister would be held as leverage. I'm sorry, Yunji said softly, genuine sorrow in her voice. I would never have asked this of you. You didn't ask, Jin replied, a new determination hardening his voice. I made my choice. Now I need to see where it leads. He checked the navigation system. 2 days and 14 hours until they reached the research station. If they weren't caught first. Tell me everything you know about the start of this war, he said. I want to be prepared for what we might find. As the small shuttle hurled through space, Yunji began to speak, unraveling 15 years of carefully constructed lies. With each revelation, Jin felt the foundations of everything he had believed crumbling away, and something new taking shape in its place. The abandoned research station loomed before them like a massive skeletal structure against the backdrop of space. Once a symbol of cooperation between humans and Vex, it now drifted silently, its exterior marked with blast damage from the early days of the war. Approach with caution, Yunji advised as Jin guided their shuttle toward the main docking bay. The station should be empty, but the Alliance sometimes sends scouts. Jin nodded, focusing on the docking procedure. The past 2 days had been tense but enlightening. Yunji had shared more memories of the pre-war era, diplomatic meetings, cultural exchanges, joint scientific discoveries. Each memory aligned with classified fragments Jin had glimpsed during his years as an executor. The shuttle locked into the docking clamps with a metallic thud. Warning lights flashed as the station's automated systems detected their arrival and began restoring minimal life support. Air quality is acceptable, Ta Jin reported, checking the scanner. Power levels are low but sufficient for the central systems. They exited the shuttle cautiously, weapons ready. Ta Jin had kept his pulse pistol, and they had acquired a second one at the trading outpost they'd stopped at. The station's corridors were dark, emergency lights casting eerie blue shadows across abandoned workstations and laboratories. The main data center should be 2 levels down, Yunji said, leading the way. That's where the original contact protocols would have been stored. As they moved through the station, Ta Jin noticed signs of hasty evacuation, personal items left behind, research materials scattered across workstations. In one laboratory, half-completed experiments still sat in preservation fields, suspended in time like insects in amber. They left in a hurry, he observed. Yunji nodded sadly. When the attacks began, there was little warning. Many believed it was a misunderstanding that would be resolved quickly. The data center was a large circular room filled with server banks and holographic interfaces. Most were dark, but a few still pulsed with faint light, running on minimal power reserves. Here, Yunji moved to the central console. This system was designed to maintain vital records even during complete power failure. If anything survived, it would be here. Ta Jin stood guard while she worked, her slender fingers moving across the interface with practiced ease. Minutes passed in tense silence before Yunji made a soft sound of triumph. "I found it," she said. "The complete records of first contact, including the peace accord signed before the war." Ta Jin moved closer, watching as documents, images, and video recordings appeared in the air before them. The evidence was undeniable. Vex and human leaders signing agreements, scientific teams working side by side, plans for trade routes and cultural exchanges. Then came the records of the explosion that had allegedly triggered the war. Security footage showed clearly what had happened, not a Vex attack, but a carefully planned bombing by humans wearing Alliance military uniforms. "These men," Ta Jin said, freezing the image on the faces of the bombers. "I recognize one of them. He's part of Admiral Song's personal security detail." The Admiral was a colonel then, Yunji noted, already rising through the ranks, but not yet at the top. Ta Jin felt sick as more pieces fell into place. Admiral Song had built his entire career on managing the Vex threat. Peace would have meant the end of his ascent to power. "We need to copy all of this," he said urgently. "Get it to people who can expose the truth." Yunji nodded, producing a data crystal from a hidden pocket in her clothing. "This can store everything. It will take a few minutes to transfer." As the download began, a faint sound caught Ta Jin's attention, the whisper of a door sliding open somewhere nearby. He raised his weapon, signaling Yunji to continue the download while he investigated. The corridor outside the data center was empty, but Ta Jin's instincts told him they were no longer alone. He moved quietly toward a junction, then froze as he heard voices, human voices, coming from the direction of their shuttle. "Sweep the station," a commanding voice ordered. "The tracking beacon shows they docked less than an hour ago. Find them, but remember, the Admiral wants the Vex alive if possible. The traitor is expendable." Ta Jin retreated quickly to the data center, sealing the door behind him. "Alliance Special Forces," he whispered to Yunji. "They tracked us somehow." Yunji's face showed no surprise, only resignation. "The shuttle. Emergency vessels have hidden beacons that even a system override can't disable." "How much longer?" Ta Jin asked, nodding toward the data transfer. 3 minutes at least," she replied. "If we disconnect now, we'll lose most of it." Ta Jin made a quick decision. "Keep going. I'll hold them off." Before she could protest, he moved to the door and began reconfiguring its security protocols. If he could delay the soldiers long enough for the download to complete, Yunji might find another way off the station. The sound of boots on metal grew closer. Ta Jin positioned himself behind a server bank, pulse pistol ready. The door to the data center shuddered as someone tried to override his security lock. "Ta Jin," Yunji called softly. There's something else you should see. Despite the danger, he glanced back. A new file had appeared on the holographic display. Personnel records for Project Sundown, a classified operation he'd never heard of. The list of subjects made his blood run cold. These are executors, he said, recognizing many of the names. All of them. Yunji nodded grimly. Not just any executors. Those who showed specific brain patterns during screening. Patterns compatible with Vex's empathic connection. The implications hit Ta Jin like a physical blow. He hadn't been chosen for his skills or loyalty. He'd been chosen because his mind was receptive to Vex's empathy, a fact Admiral Song had somehow discovered and exploited. The Admiral didn't warn me against eye contact to protect me, Ta Jin realized. He was afraid I'd connect with you and learn the truth. The door lock failed with a hiss of escaping air. Ta Jin spun, firing a warning shot as the first soldier appeared in the doorway. Lieutenant Ta Jin, a familiar voice called. Stand down. That's an order. Admiral Song himself stepped into view, flanked by 4 elite guards with weapons aimed at Ta Jin's head. I'm disappointed, Lieutenant, the Admiral said, his tone conversational. You were one of our best. Now look at you, corrupted by alien influence. The only corruption is yours, Admiral. Ta Jin replied, keeping his weapon raised. I've seen the records. I know what you did to start this war. The Admiral sighed. Always so righteous. Did you really think you were the first to discover this? He gestured around the data center. Why do you think we never destroy this station? We keep it as a honeypot, a trap for idealists like you who might stumble upon fragments of the truth. Behind them, Yunji quietly removed the completed data crystal, slipping it into her clothing. The download is complete, she announced, drawing the Admiral's attention. Ah, the specimen speaks, Song said, his eyes cold. I hope you enjoyed your little excursion. You'll be back in a cell soon enough, a much more secure one this time. Ta Jin's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with no clear escape route. Then he noticed Yunji's hand moving subtly toward the environmental controls. Understanding her plan, he kept talking to distract the Admiral. Why? Why start a war that's killed millions? Resources, power, advancement. Song replied dismissively. The usual reasons, but more importantly, control. War gives us control. Peace is messy, unpredictable. During war, people follow orders. As the Admiral spoke, Yunji's fingers found the emergency purge switch, a fail-safe designed to vent contaminated air. Before the soldiers could react, she activated it. Alarms blared as the ventilation system reversed suddenly, creating a powerful vacuum that pulled them all toward the ceiling vents. In the chaos, Ta Jin grabbed Yunji's arm and pulled her toward a maintenance shaft he'd noticed earlier. After them, the Admiral shouted, struggling against the artificial wind. Bullets and energy bolts flew around them as they scrambled into the narrow passage, sealing it behind them. The shaft led away from the docking bay, away from their shuttle, but also away from their pursuers. There's a secondary docking area for research vessels, Yunji said as they crawled rapidly through the maintenance tunnel. If we're lucky, something might still be operational. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then stopped altogether as the station's automated systems, triggered by the emergency purge, began sealing off sections. They'll find another way around, Ta Jin warned. Yes, Yunji agreed. But now we have what we came for, and something they don't expect. What's that? Ta Jin asked as they emerged into a smaller auxiliary hangar. Yunji smiled, her violet eyes gleaming in the dim light. Hope. The small Vex scout vessel cut silently through the darkness of deep space, its unique engine design leaving no energy signature for Alliance trackers to detect. Ta Jin sat at the co-pilot station, watching unfamiliar star patterns through the viewport. They had been traveling for nearly a week, following a complex route Yunji called the Shadow Path, a series of gravitational wells and radiation clouds that masked their trajectory. "We're approaching the outer boundary," Yunji said, her fingers dancing across the alien controls. One final jump. The vessel hummed softly as its drive system engaged. Space seemed to fold around them, stars stretching into lines before snapping back into focus. When the view stabilized, a small blue-green planet hung before them, partially hidden in the shadow of a gas giant. "Welcome to Haven," Yunji said softly. Tajin leaned forward in amazement. The planet looked remarkably Earth-like, with swirling cloud patterns over vast oceans and green continents. "I've never seen this system on any Alliance chart." "Because it doesn't exist in Alliance records," she explained. "We've kept a few places hidden, even from our own government. Places where those who sought peace could find refuge." As they descended toward the planet, Tajin began to make out structures on the surface, buildings that blended harmoniously with the natural landscape rather than dominating it. Some showed clear human architectural influences, while others had the flowing, organic designs characteristic of Vex construction. "How many people live here?" he asked. "About 12,000, 2/3 Vex, 1/3 human, plus a few representatives from other species who joined us after escaping the war." The ship landed on a platform extending from a hillside. As the hatch opened, warm air carrying unfamiliar sweet scents flowed into the cabin. Tajin hesitated before stepping out. After years of military service and weeks as a fugitive, the concept of safety felt almost foreign. A small reception committee waited nearby, 3 Vex and 2 humans. Tajin tensed instinctively, his hand moving toward his weapon before he caught himself. "They're friends," Yunji assured him. "The Council of Haven." One of the humans stepped forward, an older woman with silver hair and keen eyes that reminded Tajin of his academy commander. "I'm Director Jinnah," she said, extending her hand. "Former Alliance Admiral, 6th Fleet." Tajin's surprise must have shown on his face, because she smiled. "Yes, Lieutenant. You're not the first to discover the truth and make the difficult choice." The next days passed in a blur of revelations. Tajin learned that Haven had existed for nearly 10 years, founded by defectors from both sides who had uncovered the truth about the war's origins. What had begun as a simple hideout had evolved into something more, a model for what peaceful coexistence between humans and Vex might look like. Director Jinnah took personal interest in Tajin's integration, assigning him quarters in a mixed residential area where human and Vex families lived side by side. It was jarring at first, seeing children of both species playing together, adults working on joint projects, technology from both worlds blending seamlessly. "You're adjusting well," Yunji observed one evening as they walked along a path overlooking one of Haven's lakes. "Better than most new arrivals." Tajin considered this. "I think I've been looking for something like this my whole life. I just didn't know it existed." In the weeks that followed, Tajin began training with Haven's Defense Force, a small but efficient group responsible for maintaining the colony's secrecy and security. His experience as an executor proved valuable, though he had to unlearn many Alliance tactics that prioritized efficiency over ethics. Meanwhile, the data crystal they had retrieved from the research station became the foundation for something bigger. The Council had been gathering evidence for years, building a case to present to both human and Vex civilian populations. Tajin's contribution filled crucial gaps. "We're almost ready," Director Jinnah announced during a council meeting 3 months after Tajin's arrival. "The broadcast system is in place. When we transmit, it will reach 80% of human colonies and nearly all Vex territories simultaneously. The Alliance will try to block it," Tajin warned, "and they'll trace the signal back to Haven." "We're counting on it," Jinnah replied with a grim smile, "which is why we won't be broadcasting from here." The plan, as it unfolded, was elegant in its simplicity. A small team would take the evidence to multiple relay points throughout neutral space. The coordinated broadcast would begin simultaneously, with each relay taking turns as the primary signal source. By the time the Alliance traced and shut down one signal, another would take its place. Ta Jin volunteered immediately. I should be part of the team. I know Alliance communication protocols better than anyone here. That's exactly why you need to stay, Jinna countered. Your knowledge is more valuable here, preparing our defenses for what comes after. The night before the broadcast team departed, Ta Jin found Yunji at their usual spot by the lake. The 3 moons of Haven cast rippling silver reflections on the water. You're going with them, aren't you? He asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded. The message will be more powerful coming from one who lived through it. Both our peoples need to see a Vex and a human standing together, speaking truth. It's dangerous, Ta Jin said softly. If you're captured, then others will continue, she finished. That's how change happens, not all at once, but in waves, each building on the last. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore filling the space between them. Their relationship had evolved over the months, from prisoner and captor to allies, then friends, and recently something more complex that neither had fully defined. I've been meaning to ask you something, Ta Jin said finally. That day in the cell, when our eyes met, what did you feel? Yunji turned to look at him, her violet eyes reflecting the moonlight. Recognition, she said simply, as if I found something I didn't know I was looking for. The broadcast went out 3 days later. Ta Jin watched from Haven's communication center as Yunji and a former Alliance captain named Minho stood side by side, presenting the evidence of the war's true origins. Their voices, one human, one Vex, alternated in telling the story, their calm certainty more powerful than any passionate plea could have been. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Riots broke out on some human colonies. Several Vex leadership councils resigned in disgrace. Alliance military ships began reporting mass desertions. 3 entire battle groups declared themselves neutral and refused to engage Vex forces. Over the next month, tentative peace talks began in neutral territory. Haven sent representatives, including Ta Jin, whose first-hand testimony about Admiral Song's confession proved crucial. The admiral himself had disappeared, likely fled to the outer colonies with others implicated in the original deception. 6 months after the broadcast, the first official ceasefire was signed. It wasn't peace yet. Too much blood had been shed. Too many grievances accumulated over 15 years of conflict. But it was a beginning. On the day the ceasefire took effect, Ta Jin stood with Yunji on the observation deck of the neutral station, where the agreement had been signed. Below them, the first joint human-Vex humanitarian mission was preparing to depart for worlds devastated by the war. What happens now? Ta Jin asked, watching the busy activity on the docking bay. Yunji's hand found his, her touch warm and familiar. Now we build something new, she said, something neither of our peoples could create alone. Ta Jin thought about the moment their eyes had first met in that prison cell, how everything had changed in a single instant of connection. Sometimes the greatest journeys began with the smallest steps. Sometimes a new world started with just 2 people seeing each other clearly for the first time. I'm ready, he said, and together they walked toward the future.